They say the job site has a rhythm, a sound to it, like a heartbeat. Steel beams clanking, hammers tapping out their own uneven beat, heavy boots thudding on concrete, and the constant hum of machines in the distance. For some, it's chaos. But to me, back in the 1990s, it was music. That's where I learned who I was. I was 20 years old when I got accepted as an indentured apprentice in the skilled trades, 1994 to be exact. I remember that summer vividly. Nirvana was still echoing through the radios, was on every television screen, and the smell of fresh-cut wood and burnt steel filled the hot, dusty air on every site I stepped on. I wasn't some kid who stumbled into this life either. I earned it. You know that old saying, it runs in the blood. That was me, third-generation tradesman. My grandfather worked with his hands till arthritis forced him out. My father, hell, he was a legend. 25 years in the trade and not a single man I met on site didn't have something good to say about him. That reputation meant everything, and I wasn't about to let him or myself down. When I applied for the apprenticeship, I didn't just scrape by. I broke records. Highest score on the entrance exam our local had ever seen. I still remember the look on the proctor's face when he double-checked my paper like it had to be a fluke, but it wasn't. I worked hard for it, studied in the evenings after long shifts at the lumber yard, flipping through worn manuals by the flickering yellow light in my basement bedroom. I didn't just want in, I wanted to be the best. And yet when I showed up for my first major commercial job site, this sprawling half-finished medical facility just outside of Columbus, I realized how little all of that mattered. In that world, nobody gave a damn about your score. What mattered was your grit, your willingness to shut up, listen and work. And I did. I was 5'7", not exactly towering, but back then I was all muscle and fire. I was up before dawn, tool belt already strapped on while others were still yawning into their coffee. I ran where others walked. I asked questions, soaked in advice, and did everything I could to stay out of trouble. Most of the older guys respected that. They saw the work ethic, the discipline. A few even pulled me aside sometimes to explain the finer details of the trade, things you don't find in books. How to judge when concrete's just right. How to feel the tension in your wrist when you're driving a screw into solid oak. How to spot a lazy weld before it causes problems down the line. But not everyone was like that. There's always that one guy, the one who sees your ambition as a threat, your name as a challenge. At our site, that guy was Ronnie Madsen. Ronnie was a big guy, had to be at least 6'5", 250 pounds easy. American Indian by heritage. He mentioned it a lot, like it gave him extra weight when he wanted to intimidate someone. Don't get me wrong, I respected his background, but he wielded it like a weapon, always pulling that card when it suited him. But more than that, he was just a bully, plain and simple. Ronnie had a way of looking at apprentices like we were gum on his boot, useless, disposable. He didn't care if you were green or seasoned. He had no patience, no empathy, and no problem making you feel 2 inches tall. I tried to avoid him at first, keep my head down and my mouth shut. But with guys like Ronnie, sometimes your silence is the very thing that puts a target on your back. One morning I was helping with a heavy lift near the east wall, tension cables, long rebar, the whole deal. I'd set my tool belt down just outside the line, because I didn't want the weight swinging me off balance. When I turned back to grab it 10 minutes later, I noticed something was missing. 2 of my most used pairs, 420 and 440 channel locks, were gone. Now, for someone outside the trades that might not seem like a big deal, but if you know tools you know what those mean. Channel locks aren't just tools, they're an extension of your hands. And mine were personalized. Blue rubber handles, my initials etched carefully into the steel. My dad showed me how to do that the day I got them. Said, "Mark, what's yours and don't let anyone take it from you." I looked around thinking maybe I misplaced them, maybe someone borrowed them for a minute. And that's when I saw him, Ronnie, 100 feet away, swaggering across the lot with my tools in his hand like he owned the place. I froze for a second, my mouth went dry. I remember thinking no, hoping maybe he was just using them real quick. Maybe he'd bring them back. It's a cardinal rule among tradesmen. You don't steal another man's tools. You don't even borrow without asking, because out there, tools are time, tools are trust. But he didn't bring them back. Instead I watched every step he took across the gravel, and up to his oversized Dodge Ram, black and dusty and lifted like he needed it to crush people's egos. He opened the driver's side door, tossed my channel locks onto the front seat like they were his, and slammed the door shut. I just stood there, heart pounding, mouth dry, eyes locked on the truck like I was trying to convince myself it didn't happen. It was such a small thing really, 2 tools, $100 maybe, but it wasn't about the money, it was the disrespect, the violation. The way he did it so casually, like he didn't expect anyone to challenge him, like he was untouchable. And I felt something twist in me. It was the first time in my young adult life I'd been directly tested, not just on my work ethic or my strength but on my dignity. And I wasn't sure what to do. I walked back to my belt slowly, slipped it on, and stared at that truck again. Guys were watching, not all of them, but enough. You learn quick that job sites are small towns, news travels fast, and in that moment I realized I had a choice to make. That moment, that single moment when I looked at that truck, at the channel locks sitting there like they belonged to someone else, still plays in my head like a movie scene. The sun was high, burning hot against my neck. The metal of my hard hat was practically frying my scalp, but all I could feel was the fire in my chest. I walked toward him, not fast, not angry looking, just steady, deliberate, like my boots were pulled forward by gravity and pride alone. Ronnie was talking to someone else by the steel trailer, laughing about something like nothing had happened. I remember hearing the crunch of gravel under my feet, the smell of diesel hanging thick in the air, and the sound of a distant saw blade screaming through wood. Everything else blurred. I stopped a few feet behind him. My voice was calm when I first spoke, too calm. Maybe. I asked him if he planned on bringing my channel locks back. He didn't even turn around, just a half sneer from the corner of his mouth like he'd heard a mosquito buzz past. Didn't acknowledge me otherwise. The guy he was talking to gave me a quick glance and then walked away, clearly not wanting to be in the middle of whatever was about to unfold. So I repeated myself, a little louder, still even. That time Ronnie turned to face me, towered over me. He looked at me like I was an I don't remember the exact words, I just remember the feeling, the condescension, the mockery, the way he claimed those tools now belonged to him, like I was supposed to nod and say, "Okay sir, thank you for the lesson." It was meant to humiliate me, right there, out in the open. A message to everyone: this is your place, you're an apprentice, you're beneath us. And just like that, something inside me snapped. It wasn't rage, it wasn't fear either. It was this bone-deep conviction, this primal awareness that if I backed down now, if I let this man take what was mine, it wouldn't end here. This wasn't just about the tools, it was about the principle. It was about who I was going to. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him he had a choice. He could bring them back, or I could smash in his damn window and take them back myself. The way he laughed. God, that laugh. It wasn't even loud, it was dismissive, like he didn't believe for a second I would follow through, like I was bluffing. But I wasn't, because when you're raised in a family where your father teaches you about respect before you can even lift a wrench, when you grow up hearing stories of how your grandfather worked through broken fingers and frostbitten winter, when your family's name carries weight in a trade built on pride and sweat and legacy, you don't let someone spit on that. I turned, walked maybe 10 steps to a pile of tools near the steel beam they'd been working on, picked up a 20-ounce framing hammer, cold steel, worn handle, familiar way. I walked past Ronnie, past the group of guys who had started gathering nearby. They weren't laughing, no one was smiling, it was silent, except for the machines in the distance and the sudden rise of wind across the lot. I walked straight up to his truck, and I drove that hammer into the driver's side window. First swing was loud, jarring, glass splintered, spiderwebbing but holding. Second swing cracked it, third shattered it. After the fourth and fifth, I reached in, grabbed my tools off the seat, turned and walked back. I didn't run, I didn't yell, just walked with my channel locks in one hand, hammer in the other, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. As I passed Ronnie, I didn't even look at him, just said over my shoulder, "Don't ever steal from me again." I didn't realize until later that my hands were shaking. He exploded, screaming, red in the face, threatening to have me thrown off the site, out of the trade, blacklisted for life. He stormed to the foreman's office like a rabid dog, glass crunching in his boots, sputtering curses like I'd just killed his dog. And I'll admit it, for a few seconds I doubted myself. My stomach turned, my future flashed before me. Had I just ended my entire career for But then something happened. One by one, guys started speaking up. Journeymen, old-timers, hard workers came up to the foreman and told him exactly what had happened. Said Ronnie took my tools, said I asked for them back, said he laughed in my face. Some even nodded toward me, muttering things like, "Kid's got balls," or "He did what he had to do." That mattered. Their words mattered. And it hit me right then. These weren't just co-workers, these were the gatekeepers of the trade, the unwritten rules, the real rule. And in that world, there's one golden rule: you never ever steal another man's tools. The foreman didn't yell at me. He didn't send me home. He just shook his head, muttered something about how he didn't want a damn war on his site, and told us both to get back to work. Said if there was one more damn problem between the two of us, we'd both be off the crew. Ronnie didn't say a word to me for the rest of the day, but the silence around me shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. The nods from guys who hadn't looked at me twice before. The way they shared coffee or clapped me on the back, like I'd been tested and passed. That night, I sat on the back step of my dad's house, still in my work boots, holding the channel locks in my lap, my name etched with a Dremel into the metal shone under the porch light. My father came out and sat beside me. He didn't say much, just looked down at the tools, then looked at me and gave a single nod. Approval. I didn't need more than that. It said everything. That moment stayed with me, not because of the violence, not because of the attention, but because it was the first time I stood tall, not just as a worker but as a man. That was the moment everything changed. The next few weeks on the site felt different, not in a loud or obvious way, but in those subtle shifts that only people who work in the trades would really notice. Where before I was just another green apprentice, now I was that kid, the one who stood up to Ronnie Madsen, the one who broke a truck window for his tools, and walked away with his job still intact. That story traveled far. By the end of the week, it had spread to at least 3 other crews in the region. My father told me, guys were calling him from other sites, telling him where I was, what I was doing, and most of all what they'd heard. Every time he heard it, he'd pass it on to me in his own quiet way, a look, a pat on the back, or a simple, keep your head on straight son. But the aftermath wasn't just a highlight reel of nods and respect, it had layers. Emotionally, I was carrying more than I let on. I'd never broken something in anger before, never caused that kind of scene, and although I stood by my actions still do, there were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of shattering glass in my head. As fall turned to winter, the days on site got colder, shorter, and somehow quieter. The wind howled through unfinished windows and under half-hung HVAC ducts, but something inside me had settled. I no longer felt like a kid trying to prove himself. I was simply there to work, and I worked like hell. The shift in me wasn't just internal. Others started noticing it too. I started getting picked for the tougher jobs, the ones that required precision, patience, and a little bit of guts. Running lines through tight overhead spaces, troubleshooting electrical systems that other apprentices wouldn't touch. The old-timers trusted me, and the younger guys started asking me questions instead of going straight to the foreman. I wasn't the new guy anymore. I was part of the crew. And then, a few months after Ronnie was gone, something unexpected happened. We were wrapping up the Columbus project, and I got assigned to a new site, just outside Dayton, a government building retrofit that was behind schedule and bleeding budget. It was a pressure cooker job full of egos, clock-watching managers, and corners that people were constantly trying to cut. It didn't take long for me to spot the new version of Ronnie. His name was Jake, mid-30s, built like a linebacker, shaved head, and a constant smirk, like he knew something you didn't. He wasn't loud like Ronnie, but his arrogance ran just as deep. He didn't yell, he manipulated, passive-aggressive comments, quiet sabotage, the kind of guy who thrived on control and enjoyed watching others squirm. First week in, he saw me as just another apprentice, tried to push me off ladders when he walked past, took my extension cords and denied it, laughed when I called him on it. It was a familiar game, and I knew how to play it, but I was different now. I didn't react, I watched, calculated. I kept my head down, but kept tabs on every dirty trick he tried to pull, documented the missing materials, took photos of sloppy wiring he'd blame on others, and built quiet alliances with the journeymen who'd seen guys like him before. One afternoon, while everyone else was on lunch, I stayed behind to finish a small task, a bracket install that needed to be wrapped by inspection time. Jake showed up and tried to muscle his way in, demanding to use the lift I was working on. But instead of backing off, I calmly told him it was logged to me for the hour, and that he'd need to go through the lead if he wanted to change that. His smile dropped. "Apprentices don't tell journeymen what to do," he sneered. I nodded slowly. "You're right, but I follow safety protocol, and the log says it's mine till 1:30. He cursed under his breath and walked off. I kept working like nothing happened, but I knew the fuse had been lit. That night, I stayed late and did something I hadn't done since the Ronnie incident. I called my dad. We hadn't talked much lately. He was getting older, his health wasn't great, and I could hear the rasp in his voice even over the phone. But when I told him about Jake, he just chuckled. Sounds familiar, he said. I asked him what to do. You already know, he said. Just don't let him pull you off your path. Use your head, be better, and that stuck with me. So the next morning when Jake tried to set me up, leaving exposed wires in my section and calling the site inspector over just in time, I was ready. I calmly walked the inspector through the chain of custody, pulled out the logs, showed him photos I'd taken earlier in the week of the panel, before Jake had touched it. Jake was written up on the spot. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile, I just thanked the inspector and went back to work. After that something shifted again, only this time it wasn't in me. It was in how I was treated. I started getting more respect from management. I was trusted to mentor newer apprentices, asked to run small crews on basic installations, even invited to planning meetings when senior workers were out. It felt surreal. I was only 21, but the truth was, it wasn't luck. It wasn't even about the Ronnie moment anymore. It was about consistency, showing up, doing the work, knowing when to push and when to pull back. And quietly, I started to see what my father had spent his life teaching me. Not just how to build with your hands, but how to build something inside yourself. Integrity, backbone, patience. It all came full circle the day I received an unexpected delivery at the Dayton site. A tool bag. My father's. He'd passed away the week before, quietly after a short illness. I'd been at his side when he slipped away, and in the quiet days after, my mother handed me something he'd set aside. His old leather tool bag, cracked and stained, with his initials burned into the handle. Inside were his tools, well worn, meticulously maintained, and a note in his handwriting: use these well, you earned them. That hit harder than anything else in my life ever had. I took that bag to the site the next day, not to use, just to place next to mine. A reminder of who I was and where I came from. A legacy passed down hand to hand. That day, as I packed up my things, I reached into my current tool bag and pulled out the same channel locks from that day with Ronnie. The blue rubber had faded a bit, the steel had scratches now, but my name, my initials were still right there, etched above the joint fastener, clear as ever. I held them in my hand and smiled, because every scar, every etched line, every memory in those tools wasn't just about revenge or pride. It was about becoming the man I was supposed to be. I don't think we ever fully realize when we cross the threshold from youth into adulthood. There's no grand announcement, no sign that says you're a man now. For most of us, it happens in moments we don't recognize until much later, after time has dulled the edges and life has layered on enough weight for us to look back with clarity. For me, it wasn't the day I smashed that window. It wasn't even the day I stood my ground against Jeff. It was years later, standing in my own garage, surrounded by generations of tools, when it finally hit me. I had become one of the old-timers. It didn't happen quickly. The years blurred, projects came and went. I got my journeyman's license, then started running crews, then entire sites. The names changed, the faces rotated in and out, but the work never left me. I built schools and hospitals, churches and city halls. I watched buildings rise from dust, felt the satisfying ache of a 14-hour shift in my bones, and stood in freezing wind just to finish a damn roof panel before the snow came. Through all of it, I carried my tools with me, not just the physical ones, though they mattered. My father's level, my grandfather's wrench, still strong despite its age, but also the lessons, the silent nods, the unwritten code, the belief that no matter what, you take care of what's yours, you respect those around you, and you never steal another man's tool. That rule was never just about pliers or drills. It was about trust, honor, identity, and that's what stuck with me. I married in my late 20s, had 2 kids, bought a modest house with a garage I turned into a workshop. My son Logan is 12 now. The first time he picked up a screwdriver, he tried to fix the door handle in the kitchen and ended up locking himself inside the pantry for half an hour. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. But when I opened the door and saw the look in his eyes, equal parts frustration and curiosity, I knew the spark was there. So I started teaching him, not just the how but the why. Why we mark our tools, why we clean them after every use, why we return what we borrow, why we never ever let anyone treat us like we don't matter. And one afternoon, I found myself telling him the Ronnie story, softly, slowly, leaving out some of the harsher details, but keeping the soul intact. His eyes went wide. You smashed a window. I nodded. I did. Did Grandpa get mad? I smiled. No, he just nodded, like he understood. Logan looked down at the pair of channel locks in his hand, the same ones, the ones I took back that day on the site. I'd kept them all these years, still used, still remember the weight of that moment every time I gripped their handles. He turned them over, noticing the faded initials. Is that your name? He asked. Yeah, I said, and one day you'll put yours next to it, but only if you earn. That moment, watching my son hold something that had traveled through so much history, was the quiet resolution I didn't know I needed. We talk a lot about legacy, about what we leave behind. For some it's money, for others a name in lights, but for me, it's this, a pair of tools, passed down with stories etched deeper than the metal itself. I still work, not every day, not like I used to. My back reminds me of every beam I carried, and every crawl space I twisted through. But I still go out to the garage, pull open my tool drawers, and run my fingers along the handles. And every time I touch those channel locks, I remember the dust of that job site, the burning sun, the sting of disrespect, and the sound of shattering glass. But more than that, I remember what came after, the quiet respect, the transformation, the long winding path of becoming a man who doesn't just demand dignity but embodies it. And I remember my father's face, that faint nod of approval, the kind you chase your whole life and never forget once you finally earn it, because that nod, that's the moment you know you're on the right path. So if you're out there somewhere in the middle of your own journey, questioning your place, wondering if standing up for yourself will cost you more than you can afford, hear this: you're allowed to take up space, you're allowed to demand respect, and you're allowed to protect what's yours. Just don't do it to prove something to others. Do it so one day when someone holds what you've passed down, they'll feel the weight of your story in their hands, and know exactly who you were, and who they can be too.